Okay, so I thought this verse was interesting, and so I thought I'd share it with you this morning. Um, this is Proverbs 12:4. In the NIV, a wife of noble character is her husband's crown, but a disgraceful wife is like decay in his bones. So let's work on one sentence at a time. So NIV has again, a wife of noble character is her husband's crown. NCV has a good wife is like a crown for her husband. NASB has an excellent wife is the crown of her husband. So notice first of all the description of the wife. NIV has wife of noble character. Then we have a good wife or an excellent wife. So I went to the SIL translation notes to figure out what this means. Okay, it says a wife of noble character. The word noble usually means strength or power. In this context, it indicates a wife who has both strength of character and competence. And it suggests a capable wife. So, based on that, I decide, and the USB handbook says principally to strength or power, her activities show that she is trustworthy, competent, and industrious. So, based on that, I decided to do this. I wrote, a wife who is able to do things well, which I feel like expresses pretty well the idea of competence. Okay, then we have is her husband's crown. NCV says is like a crown, and NASB is the crown. So we have a specialized form of the verb to be that expresses a metaphor. So that's the verb to be, the X version. So we can see that in the ontology if we go to events and then look up the forms of to be. The X version says it's used in metaphors. Now the reason we came up with that specialized sense is because a translator could decide that he wants to express metaphors like similes. It could be expressed as be like if the translator wanted. So we're going to use that specialized sense. And then instead of writing the crown of her husband, I expressed it as the royal hat. Okay, now why do I do that? That's because crown, although we have it in our ontology, is a complex word, and the explication is royal hat. So in simple terms, that's how we express it. Okay, now let me show you one more thing about this sentence. It says, is the royal hat of the husband of a wife who is able to do things well. So, why didn't I say of that wife's husband, which would express it very well in English? The reason is because I don't know the order of words in the target language, and maybe the subject in the target language will be last. We really don't know. So I use the full explication, husband of a wife who is able to do things well, as the in this description of the crown. And then because this one might be, the first one might be expressed as a pronoun. So that's how I wrote the first sentence, and in the English, the literal version is, a wife who is able to do things well is the crown of her husband. So that's what it means here. But I'm including a dynamic version to explain what this means more clearly. So in the dynamic version, a wife who is able to do things well causes her husband to have honor, just like a royal hat or a crown causes a king to have honor. So that explains the meaning of it, that she causes him to have honor like a crown does. Now notice I put for a royal hat causes a king, then I put the king and I use this implicit necessary notation. Remember that anything after an underscore is not interpreted automatically by the computer, but it is notation for the person who's analyzing this. So this shows that a king is not in the literal text, but it's necessary for our representation because we need the subject of this sentence. So in English, a wife who is able to do things well causes her husband to have honor, just like a crown causes a king. This is how we mark this necessary implicit notation in the English, causes a king to have honor. So that pretty well expresses the meaning. Now we could have used a good wife or an excellent wife, and that would not be bad. I chose to do who is able to do things well, meaning capable, based on the translation notes and USB handbook. There are two versions of able. I probably didn't need to use this because the A sense would have been chosen automatically, but our two senses of able, one means to have ability, so she has ability to do things well. The other form of able is situational. You're able to do something because of the situation. So I marked the sense of able here with that A. So let's look at the second sentence. But a disgraceful wife is like decay in his bones. NCV has a disgraceful wife is like disease in his bones. Disease would not have been a bad way to express this, but I chose to use decay. She who shames him is like rottenness in his bones. I also considered using the adjective rotten for rotten bones, but rotten only occurs a couple of times in the Bible, and rotten is not in the Longman Defining Dictionary. It turned out that decay is not currently in our system, but it is in the Longman Defining Dictionary. So that's the basis of our simple words, decay. And the first meaning, if you look up decay in the Longman Dictionary, is the verbal form. So I chose to suggest that we would introduce the verb decay. You can see that I looked for rotten, and rotten is not in the Longman Dictionary. So I'm suggesting that we add the verb decay, and I put a note to the person who's analyzing that the verb decay is in the Longman Defining Dictionary, so I'm suggesting that it be added. So let's see how I did this in the literal version. But a wife who causes her husband to be ashamed, and note, in English it would make more sense to say a wife who causes that wife apostrophe s husband, but I wrote it the same way because I don't know the order of the words, and this would likely be expressed as a pronoun in English, who causes her husband. A wife who causes a wife's husband to be ashamed, so that's how I express the idea of disgraceful. The person who's disgrace means shame, and the person who's going to be ashamed is her husband. So I said a wife who causes her husband to be ashamed, and it turns out that actually that we have a verb, shame, complex word, and the expression is cause somebody to be ashamed. So actually in the English, I'm going to write, but a wife who shames her husband. Okay, so let's go back. With the complex word shame. To shame X is to cause X to be ashamed. So let's go to the literal version. But a wife who causes her husband to be ashamed is like bones that decayed. So that's the literal version. And I had this note about the verb decay. But then I added a dynamic version to make this more clear, the meaning. So, but a wife who shames her husband will destroy her husband, just like bones that decay destroy a person. So in the English it says, but a wife who shames her husband will destroy her husband, just like bones that decay destroy a person. In the complex concepts section, I define crown as a royal hat and shame X is to cause X to be ashamed. So that's how I did this verse.